Welcome to Democratic Television, a program of the Santa Clara County Democratic Party that brings insights, perspectives, and attitudes of our always thoughtful Democratic guests. Our focus today is on local government, and our guest is Raul Peralez, a member of the San Jose City Council. Raul, welcome to our show. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me, Bill.
So, we like to start our shows learning a little bit about our guests and about their personal background, coming from, wherever you'd like to start and sort of to the place that brought you to public service.
Yeah, thank you. I'm happy to share, it's exciting. This is actually my second opportunity here on the show. Happy to be back personally.
Welcome back.
And, for me, it was actually sharing my story was one of those things that I had to learn to feel comfortable to do, as odd as that may sound, right? Because it's your own personal story. But I have enjoyed helping to share my family story and my story, and certainly the introduction into politics that I've had, and especially this year during my reelection.
I think that experts in political communication are increasingly saying that being able to share that narrative is an important way to connect with voters. So where did it start for you?
Yeah, so, kind of paying a little homage to sort of just how I ended up here. I was born in West San Jose, grew up in West San Jose, born and raised here in San Jose. And my father immigrated from Mexico when he was 12, and he grew up in Alviso, fairly poor immigrant family, work in the fields here. My mother grew up in Redwood City, also from an immigrant family, but about 100 years before that, from Ireland. And my parents met very young age in high school, had my sister and had myself before they were both 20 years old.
Wow, that's a young family by modern standards.
Yeah, very young family. And so we grew up humble, hardworking here in West San Jose. But my parents were tremendous. They were there to help encourage my sister and I to stay involved in school, get involved in sports. And I ended up in a very good high school, Cupertino High School.
Fabulous.
One of the good public schools here in the area, and ended up being able to go to San Jose State. Was the first in my family actually to graduate from college.
Fabulous.
Ended up with a degree in mathematics. Was always an interest of mine, and the idea was to go into teaching. And so I actually did end up serving as a substitute teacher for 10 years.
Fabulous.
But after my first year of substituting, I realized I didn't want to do that for the next 40 or 50 years of my life. It's a very challenging career, and one that I enjoyed in the field of subbing. But I ended up going back to school, went to Mission College, became an EMT, and doing a year and a half of EMT work actually is what led me into my next career, which was to be a San Jose police officer.
Wow, fabulous. I want to find out a little more about your dad. Coming from Mexico at the age of 12 and living in Alviso, was their family involved in agriculture? And did your dad share much with you about that, or did you learn much through other family members about what their life would have been like at that time?
Yeah, I learned a little bit growing up from my father, but he didn't share a lot. I was able to, they grew up in Alviso, and my father went from a trailer park to living in a garage, somebody's garage, and when I recall going over to my grandmother's house, that's where they were. They were still in somebody's garage out there in Alviso. And I didn't know too much until I was getting older and would talk to my dad about, what his childhood was like. And indeed, they were working the fields here. My dad had done some of the picking out here in the fields. My grandmother worked in the cannery. My grandfather was a landscaper. My dad also did some work with him. So traditional immigrant family, working hard just to survive.
Wow, that's amazing. And so that perspective of life, you mentioned that you went to a good public high school. Do you feel like that was an important part of your path to being able to go to college and have access to that?
Yeah, absolutely. So neither one of my parents actually finished high school. So because they had my sister and I in high school at such a young age, both of them ended up dropping out, and my dad went straight to work. He's been at Pepsi-Cola for 37 years. So
wow, that's great.
Since
longevity.
Then. Yeah, longevity since then. And my mother worked off and on, but primarily was taking care of my sister and I at home. And so for us, we were fortunate, and our parents knew that there was a good school district there in West San Jose. So we grew up in San Jose, but West San Jose borders right around Cupertino and Santa Clara.
Yes, it's interesting. A lot of the school districts kind of cross over. What was San Jose like when you were growing up? What was your experience and memory of it?
Yeah, I remember it being what felt more like a small town, which even today, right, people will say that, right? Big city, small town element.
Yes.
And we grew up in West San Jose, so it's more suburban area. We took some trips around San Jose. We'd go to East San Jose to Tropicana to go and go shopping, buy some fresh made tortillas, or we'd go into downtown San Jose, for different events. My parents were part of a Chicano culture, so we'd go cruising in their Impala in downtown San Jose.
Now I've been cruising in an Impala, but in Detroit, so that's an interesting shared experience.
Yeah. Well, obviously Detroit, right? I mean, you're gonna be able to cruise all the cool cars out there.
Yes, exactly. So how did you think you ended up on the west side? Was it your dad's connection to El Viso, or were they just looked for a place where they would have access to a good school for their children, or just random life?
My parents were looking for an affordable place that they can move into.
Okay, good.
And they also were looking for good school districts, and so they found an affordable spot out in West San Jose. We grew up in a fourplex, a rent-controlled, actually, apartment complex.
Right.
And we're districted into Cupertino High School.
Wow. That's such a challenge for young people today, and I know that as a younger office holder, you probably hear that story as much or more than any others about looking for that place, the affordable place to live and raise a family, and I'm sure you faced that yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So San Jose State must have been an interesting experience. Was that, because that was a little more urban, it sounds like, than the neighborhood that you lived in?
Yeah, I had fallen in love with downtown San Jose through either when we went with my parents and we would go cruising. Actually, my first car was a 65 Impala, so I joined a car club here in San Jose and I was cruising through downtown. I loved downtown. I loved more of an urban environment, so I wanted to be downtown, but I also wanted to be home. I loved San Jose and I wanted to stay here. I had a lot of friends that went off to college, so I was happy to be here and happy to go into San Jose State.
So, Raul, you mentioned being a substitute teacher and having that interest in teaching, and then being trained as an EMT and becoming a police officer. Those are all sort of service-related jobs. And was there something kind of from family life that you think brought you to that place?
Yeah, the biggest goal for my parents was always taking care of the family, right? And so my mother worked in retail, my father worked at Pepsi-Cola, and the warehouse mainly is where he's been his entire career. But serving of their family and the community was always really key as a value for my parents, and so I learned it from them. We were the house that was always open to everybody. I mean, we had random friends or family friends living with us when there was struggles or when the people were moving or whatever it might be. So we always had this service to others as part of our family. And for me, it was an interest, and initially the interest was within teaching. But even when I wanted to go back to school and look at what else I might want to do, it was always around public service, and that's when it was EMT work, and then ultimately police work, and then what I'm doing now.
So I think for many people, EMT service would be exciting enough, and it would be a place where you might hang out. What brought you to make the step beyond that to enter into police work?
Yeah, actually, my boss, when I first got hired, she was also my practical teacher at Mission College. She ran her own private company here in San Jose as an EMT, and she was the head EMT at back then HP Pavilion, which is now SAP Center.
I see.
And she hired me, and actually one of the first things she told me is EMT work is not a career. It's a stepping stone to something else.
Wow.
Because most EMT work does not provide pensions and benefits, and there's typically no growth in pay in EMT work. You use that as a stepping stone either into a role of a paramedic, and then maybe ultimately a firefighter, or maybe into the role of an emergency room tech. But sort of it's a stepping stone career. And so that was one of the first pieces of advice I got was, don't do this for long. It's
what useful practical advice. That's very helpful. Well, how did you get started in police work, and how did you make that decision, and what was that like?
Yeah, well, so part of the Chicano culture that I grew up in, as I mentioned with my parents, what that also brought along was sort of a lack or a disdain for policing, quite frankly. The Chicano culture, especially back in the times, you think of, with zoot suits and the zoot suit riots and low riding in San Jose and all that, that was a culture that my family was a part of. And so I never once thought I might become an officer. The
sort of, when you say lack of respect, do you mean not really disdain, but maybe more, because I know a lot of communities of color have complicated relationships with their police departments. Is it more the latter that you mean, or? Yeah,
honestly, it wasn't personal, wasn't something that I was trained, but in part of the culture, there's just this us versus them in that Chicano or immigrant culture. And mainly it comes from a lack of understanding,
Right.
just not knowing, one another, not knowing what police officers are actually there to do.
Right.
And so I didn't know. We never called 911. We never, we just didn't really have any positive or negative, quite frankly, interactions with police.
Right.
And so for me, it wasn't something that I ever thought I might end up doing. But through EMT work, actually, that same boss of mine, Angie Martinez, who was also a City of San Jose Park Ranger for a number of years,
I see.
was the one that encouraged me to say, hey, you've got this great background. Have you ever thought about policing or firework? And I said, no, this was kind of sort of the beginning of the shift of me exploring a new career. And so I was able to meet a number of police officers through that career, and ultimately rolled the dice, took the chance, and applied and got hired.
Wow, that's fabulous. It sounds like your personal life and your experience growing up would really have informed your police work. Was that the case when you finally got on the job and were doing that?
Absolutely, yeah. So in the substitute work actually that I'd done, I started out at my old high school, Cupertino.
Oh, fabulous, that's cool.
Yeah, I went over to East Side and then worked at a few charter schools, and ultimately ended up in juvenile hall.
I see.
And so the youth that I was working with, and I loved...
In juvenile hall teaching?
In juvenile hall teaching, yeah.
Oh,
so Osborne High School in juvenile hall, for the students that are in there.
Right.
I enjoyed that. I enjoyed working with some of the more challenging youth
Right.
to be able to educate. And it absolutely helped me in my career as a police officer. I had a much more, sort of greater bandwidth of understanding of the youth and of that culture and that dynamic in our community.
In your police work, were there particular parts of the community that you policed and worked in? Was there a particular precinct? Where did you end up?
Yeah, I predominantly worked in East San Jose and South San Jose.
I see.
So I lived in downtown San Jose, so I tried to avoid kind of policing around home
Right.
for the most part. I grew up in West San Jose, and the few shifts that I had worked actually out in West San Jose, unfortunately ended up arresting some people that I knew from back in high school, and
That's very
those
awkward.
are never, very awkward situations. And so in an attempt to avoid that for the most part, I really enjoyed working on the East Side, so I worked a lot on the East Side, and I worked in South San Jose. The 8 years that I was an officer, the entire 8 years, I worked the graveyard shift.
Wow.
And I worked on patrol the entire 8 years.
In the work that you use, especially on the graveyard shift, I would guess that that's active in a certain way that other shifts may not be. How did you maintain a positive idea about human nature and the community? Did you encounter a lot of things that kind of challenged you on that regard?
Absolutely, yeah. And that's part of the unfortunate aspect of work as a police officer. Who you're sort of interacting with day to day are criminals and individuals, right, breaking the law, and people that are having maybe the worst day of their life, right? The only time they're going to interact with police.
Yes.
Certainly at night, one of the kind of phrases is that there's out at night, right, after midnight, right, it's only cops and criminals that are
Right.
out. And so absolutely, had that opportunity to interact with a lot of these individuals, and fortunately, I was conscious myself personally of not becoming jaded
Right.
in the career,
Right.
but it took a conscious effort to ensure that I could do that.
I imagine so. Well, thank you so much for sharing so much about your background and personal life. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, I'd like to talk about your start in elected public life and what you've been doing since then and what you're looking forward to doing. So thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hello, my name is Jerry McNerney. I'm the newest elected member of the United States Congress from Northern California. I represent the 11th Congressional District. I got involved in politics because my son encouraged me to do so. I'd never thought about doing that before in my life. And here I am now in Congress helping to change the direction of our country. If you would like to get involved in your country, we need you, we need your help, the community needs you. Please contact your local Democratic Party at 408-445-9500 and help make a difference. Thank you.
Well, welcome back for the second segment of our show. We're here with San Jose City Councilman Raul Peralez. Raul, thank you for sharing about your family in the first segment of the show. I'd like to talk a little bit about your public life. At some point, you transitioned from your San Jose police officer career to running for city council. How did that decision come about? What made you think to do that?
Yeah, well, I'd actually been an officer for 3.5 years, and I originally got hired in 2006, and the recession hit.
I see.
And I was not very politically involved. I was involved socially in politics. I'd been involved in the first May Day March in 2006, right? And My mother was a registered Democrat and was voting, though, mainly in just presidential elections. And so it wasn't until the recession hit and it sort of woke me up. I got a pink slip from the city of San Jose when we laid off officers for the first time in our history.
Yeah.
I was fortunate. I did not get laid off, but it woke me up. And I wanted to know more about what was going on, not just nationally, because that's what you saw in the news, but we were feeling it here locally.
Right.
And so I ended up just attending more of my union meetings, the SJPOA, religiously, and wanted to learn more about, kind of local politics and what was going on, why, what was happening with our mayor at the time and the pension decisions they were making, and that sort of spurred the beginning of my political career.
Wow. And I remember that time, and the pink slips were coming to San Jose police. They were coming into school districts throughout the area. And I know it must have been a stressful time for the employees who were affected by that uncertainty, because, of course, one's livelihood and well-being depends on having a job. You mentioned connecting with your union, but you also kind of became active and connected with the Democratic Party. Can you talk a little bit about how you got started doing that as part of your entry into politics?
Yeah, I had been a registered Democrat since I was 18, came from the values of within my family, and like I said, my mother as well. My father actually was never registered to vote. He wasn't a citizen. He actually didn't become a citizen until I compelled him during my first race, but maybe I'll chat a little bit about that in a moment.
Well, good for you.
And for me, just getting more involved, I wanted to see how I can get involved. I didn't know there were even any Democratic clubs or political clubs that were out there. And so as I began, kind of exploring, I attended a rally, one of the 99% rallies that were going on at the time.
Good.
There was a group at the time called the Dream Menders that was hosting that rally, and through them and through an encouragement from others was convinced to go and take a look at the Silicon Valley Young Democrats. At the time, I was around 29 years old or so, and actually ended up attending my first SVYD meeting that year, and met who is now my wife at that first meeting.
Congratulations, that's fabulous. So if people want to be successful in politics and life, they should join the Silicon Valley Young Democrats or a similar club and become active in public life. That's
Uniquely,
great.
It's not the only story. There's actually a lot of stories like that.
I suppose it reflects like where people are at that age and that point in life. Well, it's interesting to me because it sounds like your connection with the Democratic Party and active involvement in the Democratic Party came through the Silicon Valley Young Democrats, and that you found out about it through a contact you made in other activism, showing up to a rally that was hosted by others. Because I think conventionally people think, well, you would Google angry Democrat or disappointed Democrat or concerned Democrat, and you might find a club. So it's good to know that personal connection is the way that you found your way into Democratic politics. At that time, had you already decided that you would run, or is that something that came a little later?
It was happening right about the same time. I didn't know I would potentially be running for office. I had thought in my mind it may be something I do later on in life. But at the moment, I was just trying to learn more about how I could get involved. And so it was volunteerism, right, and getting involved in other campaigns, walking on some campaigns. That was what was exciting to me. But at the same time, certainly the seed was being planted that maybe sometime in my future, I may run for politics as well.
Right. So you were living downtown at the time, in your district is the downtown district, as people sometimes refer to it. Is that correct?
Yeah.
What was going on downtown? Is there some stuff about your home turf that made you feel like it was a good thing for you to get involved in city government?
Yeah, so aside from my personal experience and through the police department, what was happening there, and a lot of our San Jose community members are well aware of what was happening with the police department, and because of the layoffs and the uptick in crime. So besides that personal experience, just living in San Jose and living downtown, the recession, stopped everything, right? There was no growth going on in downtown. It was very stagnant, and we had sort of suffered from that history for some time, ever since, like the 80s and when some of our, like Macy's and the shopping, moved away from downtown and went out to the different shopping malls. So we'd always struggle with this, and during that time, it was no better. Vacant storefronts out in front, no development going on, and in fact, a rise, which now we're seeing even more of a crisis with homelessness.
And at that time, did you feel like, did anybody have a plan for downtown or a vision for downtown? What was your sense of where things were at that moment?
Yeah, I believe there was, right? There were some plans, some outdated, some that people were working on. But really, everybody was in crisis mode. right? Everybody was sort of reacting to what was happening during the recession. I don't think anybody had expected, that it would be that bad. And so everything else got put on hold, really. So even if there was a plan to, hey, let's try to spur some development and get some job growth in the city and in downtown, none of that was being worked on because everybody was in crisis mode, just trying to recover from the recession.
I see. Did you get pushback or did you have a sense when you were first running of anyone's judgment being that you were too young to be a council member and to really have an idea about what a city that was emerging to be such a significant city, how it would be governed? Did you get a sense of that, or were people mostly supportive?
No, I definitely got a sense of that.
You did?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I started sort of the campaigning the race when I was 31. And, so absolutely, it was something that I heard relatively often, whether it was from individuals that were actually already in elected office or somehow involved in politics that felt as though they knew better, and then as well from community members, right, when we were out and about, that felt, hey, aren't you a little young to to be running for office?
Right. And how do you feel? What would you attribute your ability to overcome that and be successful and be elected?
To me, it just personally didn't affect me. I had done a lot of things young, I guess, per se. When I started substitute teaching in high school, I was 22 years old.
Right.
When I started off as a police officer, I was 24. And so I had been in situations where you were expected to be responsible and make some very tough decisions. And so for me, it was no different. And so I really took it with a grain of salt. Right. And what I was hoping to compel to people was that I was qualified, because it didn't have to do with my age. It had to do with my qualifications and my interest and I think passion for why I wanted to serve.
Yes, it's certainly true that by that time you'd had more careers in public service than many people ever have, so you clearly were ready. Well, what did you find when you went on council? What did you work on? What were the challenges? You've mentioned that period of the recession. It was a pretty dark time in recession. I know government's hard because there aren't resources to address the problems. What did you find, and what were some highlights and some challenges? Yeah,
so my priorities coming into office that year were along the lines of the crises that everybody else was dealing with. Public safety, rebuilding our police department, and
that's an ongoing challenge, isn't it?
Still an ongoing challenge, but absolutely one that we've been able to resolve the pension issues, which we're fortunate, and our police department now has been hosting 3 academies a year, graduating upwards 30 to 50 individuals each academy. Right. So we are rebuilding, and we have sort of pulled ourselves out of that dark hole. Similarly, amongst other public services, right? Whether it's through the library, public works, we have been able to rebuild from that dark time. But at the same time, we've also seen a lot of growth in economic development in our downtown and just throughout the city. So similarly, as we were experiencing a lot of the vacant storefronts, right, and a lack of development, that has also been spurred to now. We've seen the investment in specifically our downtown core, hosting the majority of the development throughout the city.
It does seem like a lot's been going on downtown and a lot of great things. I imagine that you take some pride in being the downtown council member. Have you felt having had a special place, at least with respect to those aspects of policy?
Absolutely, yeah, right. There's a central focus. I've always loved the downtown again, and sort of seeing our city grow from being sort of maybe that teenager of a big city to growing into the big city, right, with more high rises coming up, more housing, more job growth. And specifically, I think where we're able to make a big difference in government, elected office, is with the public investment. So not just in improving our roadways and that infrastructure, but bringing in things like BART. Bay Area Rapid Transit, right, or high-speed rail, improving Dearborn Station. All of those things have helped spur a lot of this other investment into the community.
So you've served your first term, and I want to congratulate you on surpassing the 50% mark in your re-election campaign. So you are now re-elected and ready to enter into your second term. And the opportunity has been so great in the past 4 years. I know the growth, the activity downtown, and that continues, but also there are challenges. There's this big proposed Google development. You mentioned Deer Down Station and the public investment there. What sort of things are your priorities for this next term and the challenges that are coming? What do you think is going to be the sort of thing that will take a lot of your time and the council's attention?
Yeah, so they've shifted a little bit, right, from 4 years ago. And I'll end with one I think that's the most important.
Sure.
Definitely public transportation is one of them. Just managing those projects that are coming through, ensuring, right, that they're positively impactful on the community,
right,
right, and that we can manage those developments as they're coming in. No simple task.
San Jose to become a place for BART to run through. You want it to be served by
exactly.
Things like that.
Yeah,
Yes.
and I've been able to serve on the VTA board as a representative of the city of San Jose as well to help oversee that. High-speed rail, no different as well, just managing that transportation investment that's happening in our city.
That's key.
The other would be with ensuring responsible development. So development is great, right? And the investment into our community is great. But if it's not responsible, if we're not building things that are sustainable, if we're not ensuring things that, like wage theft is not occurring, right, which we've seen now some terrible examples that have happened in private development within our downtown. If we're not ensuring responsible development, right, and you're kind of just letting it go off on its own, that's also not going to be a positive impact for the community. So things like Google coming in, we can ensure that they also create a positive investment into the community. And the biggest, I think, positive investment they can create is my #1 priority, which is in regards to affordable housing.
Right.
So not only can we ensure that, say, Google is a participant in making a difference in building up affordable housing for the homeless, permanent supportive housing, but across the board, that's something that here in the city of San Jose, County of Santa Clara, and I think as we've seen across the state, right, and across the country, focusing on homelessness and affordable housing is certainly my #1 priority.
Well, that's fabulous. I appreciate from a Democratic perspective your commitment to making sure that the great things that are happening in San Jose really benefit everyone. We're running short on time, and I want to bring everyone up to present day. Can you say, you mentioned a development in your personal life, getting married to someone you met through the Democratic Party, and you have some news that you can share with our listeners?
Yeah, so I met my wife, Victoria Ramirez, that first day at the Young Dems.
Fabulous.
We've been happily married for a year and a half, been together for over 6 years, and actually we're expecting our first child. October 22nd, a little boy.
Fabulous.
And we're really, really excited to bring him into our lives.
Fabulous. Well, my last ask will be to you raise him to be a good, strong Democrat like yourself and Victoria. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching DTV. Give us a call at 408-445-9500 or visit our website at www.sccdp.org. Help us to make a difference. We'll see you on the campaign trail.